No, I'm in Thailand. Um, but let me get us up here on the of what? Oh, well, because you're not in that book right now. We're not in that volume. You're not in that. We're in different we're skipping around volumes. That's not going to help you anymore. That's not going to help you, that volume. No, it's a great volume to have, but yeah, you're going to have to get all 72 volumes if you're going to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're not going to be able to do that anymore, unfortunately. Only because um we're jumping around, and even in one class we're going to be jumping around. Look, the good thing, that's a better translation. The problem is we're not going to be using brachot every week. As a matter of fact, we're not going to be using brachot much because um we're going to be reading from different sections and following ideas rather than a straight through text. Well, last time we did brachot, the time that you were there before, 17 years ago, we did brachot, and we did then avodah zarah. So we did two tractates, but no, this time we're going to jump around. We've jumped around before when we studied Talmud, but we've never studied to the extent that we're going to be doing this, which is again a kind of overview. And looking at ideas rather than necessarily, going page after page. As I told you, I mean, it would take us 50 years to do Talmud at the rate that we study it. It would take us about 50 years. It would take us 50 years to do. No, no, no. If we studied once a week, if we studied every day, the Daf Yomi, it would take us 7 years. But if we only study one day out of 6 or 7, Daf Yomi is is a 7 year cycle. So if you're doing that, it's a good question. It kind of depends. A lot of people kind of set aside like an hour and a half for it. But so if you did it once a week instead of 7 times a week, it would be 7 times more, which is 49 years. So um and you know, it's a worthy undertaking. There's a lot of ways to study the Daf Yomi now, thankfully, because of technology. No, I've never done it. So there are pages of the Talmud that I have not read. Yeah, I haven't read every page of Talmud, and I definitely focus more on the Aggadic, the legend, more than I focus on the Halakha. We went through a few tractates, but we didn't go through. And even in that case, we only went through a couple of tractates. Yeah, in rabbinical school, they're not, at least in the even in the Orthodox world, they either assume that you've already studied Talmud by the time you get to rabbinical school in an Orthodox yeshiva, Orthodox rabbinic yeshiva, or they know you're going to be studying it every day. In the Reform and Conservative world, they try to give you an exposure to it so that you know you get an overview. It, yeah, correct, correct, correct. So the answer is, as Mike was saying, the same thing goes for the Torah. And I would say that and I've said this before, in some yeshivas, they study Talmud more than they study Torah. So on Torah, yeah, a lot of people aren't. Partly it's because I studied more as a kid, the Torah, and because I was interested in it, and then I did it in college, and I did it I did it in other environments that were not rabbinical school. If I had relied on my rabbinical school to teach me Torah, I would have had very little knowledge, unfortunately. I don't think about it a lot from that standpoint of like, yeah, but they don't normally do that. But uh, yeah, that is the case. So today I thought we'd take a, well, I mean, we're lucky in the sense that, well, thank you, but thanks, but I think that, I sometimes take for granted that people had that, by the time they get to rabbinical school, and it's just not the case. When I was in rabbinical school, it was obvious when I finally learned that. But yeah, I assume that people, had an exposure, but it's not possible. It's not something that you can do. So today I thought when we go through, some concepts that at least to start with, we'd actually look at some of the ways, at least some of the ways that we can, that we can get to have some knowledge of what's going on in the Talmud is actually to look at some of the rabbis in particular, and um, and one of the people that I thought we would launch off on is uh, is Rabbi Akiva. And so, what? Yeah, and interestingly, I thought about starting with Hillel because he's one of the first rabbis, but we already started talking about Akiva. So even though he lives 150 years after Hillel, we don't necessarily have to study these people in chronological order. And I wanted to do it while we were still familiar enough with Rabbi Akiva that that when we talk about him, you have a little bit better context because we've talked about him in certain ways already. So, we've already been exposed to Rabbi Akiva in a couple of ways recently. The most recent was we talked about two things with Rabbi Akiva. Interestingly, we talked about him 2 weeks ago when we read the story of the oven of Achnai, which was the story of the oven that was the argument over it that God intervenes and they say, well, sorry, you've given us a Torah. Well, Rabbi Akiva's job is then to go tell Rabbi Eliezer, his teacher, that you're now banned. And so Akiva does that. So it kind of shows us a little bit of Akiva. But the other thing we talked about was the previous week when we read the end of Brachot in chapter 60 of page 61 about his martyrdom and how he said the Shema with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might as he died. And so we read about his death and that scene of him dying and his students saying, how did he, how did he hold on? And he says, because I always wanted to fulfill that mitzvah of loving God with all with everything. So we saw two things. So we actually a couple of weeks ago looked at his death, his martyrdom, which then becomes kind of to some extent he becomes the one of the most famous of the martyrs. Not the only one, by the way, obviously, but one of the most famous. So his death becomes pretty well known. But we're going to look at some of the other things about Rabbi Akiva today. Now, the problem, of course, is that most of the information that we have about him in the Talmud seems to be mythological. I'll put it that way, in the sense that these things may not have happened, or they're embellished. This is not something we should be surprised at, not because he lived 2,000 years ago. There are a lot of people who lived 2,000 years ago that we have some information on, and it's either uh, you know true, partly true, completely not true, uh, but it's hard to verify. But it's not just people 2,000 years ago, though, Mike, right? We have a story about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. That's not a story that happened. There's no evidence for that story. No, I mean, we actually kind of know the person who made that story up. So George Washington, was born 300 years ago, and there's a legend about him that's one of the most, arguably one of the most famous things we hear about from his childhood, and it's a mythological story. There's no basis for it at all, but it was used as a story to, of course, make his honesty, to illustrate his honesty. So we know he is an honest, ethical person, and so the story of him chopping down the cherry tree becomes an example of that. So sometimes the stories are used to kind of highlight a virtue, a feature of a person's life, which again, the actual incident may not have happened, but these are the things that people thought about them. And it was in the realm of possibility. That when somebody made up a story like that, even if they made it up, it sounded true. It sounded, again, maybe not factual, but it sounded true. Who? Didn't Rabbi Akiva write it? No, his students would have written it. So some of the stories may have been written not long after he died or even while he was alive. But, you know, we don't know how long after. He lived before the Mishnah was finished. The Mishnah is finished in 200. So technically speaking, he lived before the Mishnah, but most of the stories about him are not in the Mishnah. They're in the Gemara, which was finished 300 years after that. So it's difficult to know how old these stories are. They're definitely at least 1,500 years old. But the stories about Akiva definitely seem to have a mythological bent to them. And so to some extent, what we have to do is kind of reconstruct maybe some facts about him and what we can definitively say about him. But more importantly, it doesn't matter. The stories about him are still stories that we can learn from. And so when we hear about his faith and his ability to live almost and die almost at a superhuman level because of his devotion, it becomes an inspiration for people. I mean, people are inspired by his life and his death for 2,000 years. So whether or not he said exactly that as he was dying, people felt that was the kind of thing that he did, and most likely he was tortured and killed. The event of him being tortured and killed is probably not. It's not made up. The other thing about him is we have his tomb. We know where he's buried in Tiberias. We can go to his tomb. This is not somebody where we can't, we don't have his body. We don't know where he is. We know he lived. There's no question that he lived. There's no factual issue that he's a made up person. Yeah, yeah, that's his tomb. I mean, they can't do a DNA test, but they know that that's his tomb. So, we know that, and we also know there's quite a few legends, and we're going to look at one of them first, actually right now, that Rabbi Akiva came from a poor background. He did not come from a wealthy background, and we've talked about this before. I've mentioned this before, if you remember. According to the rabbis, his ancestry itself, it's questionable whether he even was from a completely Jewish ancestry, in the sense that there is a tradition that he was not 100% from Judean stock. So let's take a look at that first. We're going to kind of use his life to teach us some lessons, and let's take a look. Yeah. What are you talking about? Oh no, where we're going to show. I'm going to put it up the page in a second. Unfortunately, I don't think anything today is necessarily going to be. Yeah, I know. Well, I yeah, yeah. So I'll give you the Safari page is going to come up. So so let's start with a little bit about this guy's life. So, give me 1 second. And so, I'm not going to say that this was, I'm not going to say that this was, some of this is verifiable, but I think it goes to, what we can learn about ourselves and not just Rabbi Akiva. I wouldn't share this if there wasn't a lesson for us before. I just want to say, hey, I see Cheryl and David are on now too. Now, I just want you to know I'm not ignoring the fact that we just got back from Israel this morning. John's with me here now, and tomorrow night we're going to have at 7 o'clock about an hour long overview of the trip to Israel. So don't fret. We will be talking about this, but in a different context.
Yeah, Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, yes, I saw that you put that out on Zoom. I was going to ask tonight if you would do that. So
yeah.
Very pleased. Thank you.
Yeah. So you got the email about it.
Yes.
So yeah, we're going to do that. So yeah, it's obviously it's very important that we share about what happened on on that trip. And trust me when I tell you that it's very difficult for us. I mean, no, I shouldn't say for us. I can just say for me, it was very difficult to come home, if you will. You know, you start to, when people say to you, uh, you know, how do you, I don't know. We had some long discussion. I had some long discussions with people today, um, about, about, what this trip was like. And, it's hard to believe. So, some of the stuff, and again, we'll share it tomorrow. When we talk about things that are legends, things that sound mythological, we're going to share some stories that I think tomorrow that sound like they were made up, but they just happened, and they just happened in the last year and a half. Right, John? So, and if I didn't hear it and have other witnesses to it and then verify it myself later, I wouldn't have believed it. So, let's take a look at Rabbi Akiva. So this is from a part of the Talmud called Avot de Rabbi Natan. So this is a rabbinic text that is part of the Talmudic literature. Let me make it a little bit bigger. And the Talmud asks a question: What were the origins of Rabbi Akiva? Which is an interesting question to ask, because, like, they don't do that with a lot of rabbis, but they do it with Rabbi Akiva. And let's take a look at what it says here about him. And it says, they say he was 40 years old and he still had not learned anything. Once he was standing at the mouth of a well, and he said, "Who carved a hole in this stone?" They said to him, "It is from the water, which constantly falls on it day after day." And they said, "Akiva, don't you know from this verse from Job, water erodes stones?" And Rabbi Akiva immediately applied this, all the more so, to himself. He said, if something soft can carve something hard, then also, all the more so, the words of Torah, which are like steel. They can engrave themselves on my heart, which is but flesh and blood. Right? So if water can erode stone, right? If something that's soft, and you look at water, you're like, this, you throw it up against rock and it doesn't do anything, but it does over time. The drip on the thumbing will erode it away. So he says, if that can do something to stone, what can steel do to my flesh? Right? That can be, if soft can do that to hard, what can hard do to soft? He immediately went and started studying Torah. He went with his son, and they sat down by the school teachers. He said to one, "Rabbi, teach me Torah." He then took hold of one end of the tablet, and his son took hold of the other, which, by the way, teaches us a little something about how they used to learn in those days. First of all, the kids were learning, right? But he didn't learn, which is why some people think maybe he was from a Gentile background. Maybe he was from a background where his family didn't pay for him to learn, which is an interesting idea. Literacy, but not necessarily universal literacy. Not maybe everybody didn't read. Maybe there were people who didn't read, but his son did. Now his son, again, maybe it was wealthier than he was. And we'll talk about that in a second, why his son might have been wealthier. That's a good question. Very good question. I don't think we learn his son's names. I don't think we learned what their names were. I'll look. I've never heard a discussion of what his son's name, but it could be there. It's just not. He doesn't become a famous rabbi on his own. Most of the rabbis don't. Most of the rabbis don't have, a father. Some do, but most of them don't. So the teacher wrote down Aleph and Bet, and he learned them, Aleph to Tav, and he learned them, the book of Leviticus, and he learned it, which tells you that they started studying in those days with Vayikra first. They didn't start with Genesis, because when they taught it to kids, they actually taught them not the beginning of the book, for various reasons. One of them being, which you and I would think the stories of Genesis are easy to read. They are easy to read. They're not for kids. Genesis is not a book for children. And so maybe again, the idea of teaching someone Torah through a book that, is pretty much full of laws, at least gives them a chance to read and learn first before the ideas are not appropriate. Maybe, but I think Leviticus maybe was the answer because again, they didn't have to get into. There's not a lot of story there, and so rather than getting kind of like like kind of distracted on story, they just read. So they're reading, and he went on and studying until he learned the whole Torah. Then he went and sat before Rabbi Eliezer. That's the guy that he had to excommunicate, right? That's his teacher, his master, who taught him. Ugh. You can see why he was so heartbroken, have to go tell him. And Rabbi Yoshua, my masters, he said, open up the sense of the Mishnah to me. And when they told him one law, he went off and he sat down to work it out for himself. This Aleph, what is it written for? That Bet, what was it written for? Why was this thing said? He kept coming back and kept asking them until he reduced his teachers to silence. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, I will give you a parable to tell you what this was like a stone cutter who was hacking away at the mountains. One time he took his pickaxe in his hand and sat at the top of the mountain and began to chip away small stones away from it. Some people came by and asked, what are you doing? He said to them, I'm going to uproot the mountain and throw it into the Jordan. They said to him, you cannot uproot the entire mountain. But he kept hacking away until he came to a big boulder. And so he wedged himself underneath it and he pried it loose and threw it in the Jordan. And he said to it, your place is not here, but there. And that is what Rabbi Akiva did to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon said to him, Akiva, it is about you that this verse says, he stops up the stream so that hidden things may be brought to light. For Rabbi Akiva has brought to light things which are kept hidden from human beings. Every day he would bundle up sticks, half of which he would sell to support himself, and half he would use for kindling. His neighbors came and said to him, Akiva, you are choking us with all this smoke. Sell it to us instead, and then buy oil with the money, and study by the light of a candle. And he said to them, but I take care of many of my needs with it. I study by its light, I warm myself by its fire, and I can make it into a bed and sleep on it. All the poor will one day be judged against Rabbi Akiva. For if one says to them, why did you never study? And they say, because we were poor, then we will say to them, well, wasn't Rabbi Akiva even poor? Completely impoverished? And if they say it is because of our babies, we will say, but didn't Rabbi Akiva have sons and daughters as well? But they will say, it is because he merited to have his wife Rachel to help him. We're going to read the story of Rachel now. We're going to skip the version that is here is very short. So that's the story of Rabbi Akiva studying. And it says he started studying when he was 40. And he didn't have a lot of money. The takeaways from that, of course, are for everybody, you're never too old to start studying. You should never feel that you're too old to start engaging in Torah study. Because Rabbi Akiva did it. Well, we don't know how old he was exactly when he was murdered, but his martyrdom, he was murdered by the Romans. We don't know how old he was, but we assume he was, already at least a middle-aged man at 40. And the other thing is he did not have the resources. He was not from a wealthy family. We are going to get into that. How did you know? Because you figured that out from that, or you know the whole story? So you already looked at it. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. No, I understand. That's good. I thought maybe you've been studying Rabbi Akiva about Rabbi Akiva. But John, no, the important thing is that, he was already up there. Not when he started studying Torah, when he even started learning the Aleph Bet. So you never should say you're too old. Never should say that, right? So let's take a look. Let's take a look at Rabbi Akiva's story with his wife, because this story is a beautiful story. I researched it a little bit when, um, yeah, I'll show you where we are in a second. Um, I researched it a little bit when we named our daughter Rachel. I mean, I knew the story of Rachel, his wife, but we're going to read it now. Yeah, partly, but I also named her after these Rachels too. So let's take a look at the story of Rachel, the wife of Akiva. So I'll tell you one second. I'm looking for the page. This is from the tractate. I think it's here. Hold it one second. Let me just 100% make sure that it's in this section. Discussion about wives. You don't know if it's in this one. I thought it was. Hold it one sec. Uh, um, Let me just see something. There's lots of discussions about wives in the Talmud, but this one is one of the great ones. And I did not name my daughter after the Rachel just because of that she was the wife, but because of what she does in this story. Okay, one second. Um, I think I might have gone either too far or I missed it. Hold it one sec. There's definitely discussions about wives. Let me find it. Uh, this is the one problem about not doing the texts right after each other. Sometimes I'm gonna lose the page. Um, oh, dope. I put in the wrong. Instead of, it's not yet, this part's not from Yevamot. This is from Ketubot 62. So one of one of the texts, Yevamot is about Levirate marriage, and Ketubot is obviously about other marriage. This is they're both page 62 though. That is why I made the mistake. Um, they're both about marriage, and they're both page 62. But this is the one where it's on. See what happens as I get older. I forget the pages. But so here we go. So this is her story. Um, I'll tell you one second. Um, okay, here we go. We're on Ketubot 62b, 60, 62b, 15. It's right here. So here it is. Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua, one of the wealthy residents of Jerusalem. And again, we're talking about this is 100 years after the time of Jesus. It's 30 years after or 70 years after the destruction of the, so 100 years after the time of Jesus, 70 years after, 60 years after the destruction of the temple. And it's during the Bar Kokhba times when Jews are starting to revolt against the Romans again. That's about the time that Akiva is older. So assumedly he was born about 100 of the Common Era. After the temple is already destroyed, there's not really Christianity. It's in its very early days. Okay. And of course, as we've talked about, he becomes one of the supporters of the Bar Kokhba revolt, maybe the most famous rabbi that supports Bar Kokhba. But he is, we already read, from a poorer background, maybe also from a Gentile, partly Gentile background. There's texts about that, but I didn't share them because they're not very. I mean, they're basically just say he's maybe the descendant of people who were not Jewish, but we know that he worked for this guy, and his name is Ben Kalba Savua. Ben means son of. The one thing that we know about this is that Ben Kalba Savua is a nickname. Kalba Savua is doesn't say it here, but maybe one of the commentaries you'll see it. Kalba Savua means a satisfied dog. Kalba is like Kelev, it's a dog in Aramaic. Kalba, and savua means satiated or full. He was known as the son of the full dog. It's not a compliment, I don't think, but maybe he didn't care. But it's somebody who's, as it says, very wealthy. And Rabbi Akiva worked for him as a shepherd, not a high paying job. At no time is that a high paying job. Again, is the next part mythological or not? Probably some elements of it are, but the idea that he's not wealthy and that he's not from a very distinguished background seems to be pretty well established. Even if the stories are embellished, I think we can take that away. So here's what happens. The daughter of Ben Kalba Savua saw that he was humble and refined. She said to him, if I betroth myself to you, will you go to the study hall to learn Torah? So you see, she wants him to do better. Now you could say, she's not happy with him, but she is happy with him. He's not rich. Well, yeah, that's the name. But she basically says, if you start to try to improve yourself, I see within you potential. Now, some people would say you don't marry somebody if you see potential in them, but she does. She knows that if he's given certain opportunities, which he might not have had because he didn't have money, that there's something special about him. So he said to her, yes. She became betrothed to him privately and sent him off to study. Her father heard and became angry. He threw her out of the house and took a vow prohibiting her from benefiting property. He disowned her. He's rich. She doesn't get the money. He throws her out. Woman's pretty heroic. She's willing to give up everything for the man she loves not because he's wealthy, but because she sees something special in him. It's pretty amazing. I wonder if I'm going to disown my daughter. No, I don't think so. I wouldn't do that, but I don't know. It's terrible. He wasn't happy with who she fell in love with. This is a great love story, right? This is like, you've seen this love story probably on some soap opera or some romance novel. Rabbi Akiva went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. When he came back to his house, he brought 12,000 students with him, and as he approached, he heard an old man saying to his wife, as he's coming down the street with his students, for how long will you lead the life of a widow of a living man, living alone while your husband is in another place? So the neighbors essentially say to her, how long are you going to put up with this for? As he's coming down the street. She said to him, if he would listen to me, he would sit for another 12 years. Rabbi Akiva heard this. He said, I have permission to do this. He went back and sat for another 12 years in the study hall. And now he came back with 24,000 students with him. You see? He decided to stay longer. She gave him permission. So he stays longer. 24 years he's not living with her for. Yeah. So you can understand when rabbis or Jews today, don't spend time with their wives while they're studying. You have this model of Rabbi Akiva, and she wants him to. She's okay with it. She encourages him to. It was her idea in the first place. His wife went and maybe it is. I said that. I said it might be imagined, but the kernel of the story is true. It's got to be true. The man married a woman who was from a higher station. She gets disowned, and this thing plays out. Now, again, was it 12 years and 12,000 and then 24? Maybe not. Maybe the amount is exaggerated, though the 24,000 students is repeated several times. Again, is it a symbolic number? Absolutely. It's 2,000 for every 12 tribe. I mean, there's definitely an element of symbolism to it, but he had thousands of students, assumedly. So here's what happens. His wife went out, heard, and went out to greet him. Her neighbor said, borrow some clothes and wear them, as your current apparel is not appropriate to meet an important person. You look like garbage, right? You don't look appropriate to meet this guy. She said to them, a righteous man understands the life of his beast. Whoa, we just read this in Proverbs, folks. She called herself a beast. She said that. I know I looked at Mary's face when she said that about herself. She basically says, look, he's he's righteous, and even if I don't look good, he knows who I am. He knows. Again, she's using a text. When she came to him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. His attendants, his other students, pushed her away as they did not know who she was. And Akiva said to them, leave her alone, as my Torah knowledge and yours is actually hers. Whew. Wow. That's a pretty bold statement. None of this was possible without her. Yeah. That's not the end of the story. Don't read ahead. What? What? Yeah. I don't know if it's for us, because we don't really care. We don't really care. But for their families, for their wives, for their parents who support them. So if you send your son away, you earn a living. Look, I saw this in the airport when I was coming home yesterday from El Al. I saw some parents who went to visit their kids studying yeshiva, and they were coming back, and they're only there because their parents are paying for them there. The parent, lawyer, whatever, back at he's doing. I heard him doing business deals. He's paying for his son to be at yeshiva in Israel. Why? Because he believes in it, and he wants his son. That's what he wants his son to do. And he earns money so that his son can study there. And so the son would say, my Torah is your Torah. Now, would it go for us? Not really, because we're not supporting them. In Israel, you could say if the government supports it, some people would say, well, they're studying Torah on our behalf, all of our behalf. But there's this understanding that the sacrifices that she made, look, ideally you study Torah for yourself, but there's an acknowledgement that if somebody has sacrificed so that you could study Torah, look, it's a beautiful story, because, I'm not done with it yet, but it's almost like one of those O. Henry stories, of the guy who, sells his watch so he can get his wife the hair clip, the gift of the Magi, that story, where Elise, you know this story, right? The gift of the Magi, the O. Henry
Yes,
story.
I'm very familiar
It's a famous story, right?
He wants to buy her a hair clip for her long hair, and she cuts her hair in order to buy him something that she thinks he wants. So
it's his
cancels
watch.
out.
It's his watch chain, and he has this beautiful watch that he sold to get her the hair clip. So it's the story, and making these sacrifices for the people we love. She gave up her livelihood, her husband's presence. And so there's a sense that, this is hers too. She shares in this because it wasn't possible without her. And what's so tragic is, of course, it didn't have to be like this. She didn't have to live in poverty because she's rich all along. Let's get to that part. Not done with that. In the meantime, her father heard that a great man came to the town. He said, I will go to him. Maybe he will nullify my vow, and I will be able to support my daughter. He came to him and asked about nullifying his vow. And Rabbi Akiva said to him, did you vow thinking that this Akiva would become a great man? He doesn't know he's talking to his son-in-law. Did you make this vow thinking that Akiva would be great? He said to him, if I had believed he would even know one chapter of even one halakha, if he had known one paragraph of the study, I would have been okay. I would not have been so harsh. He said to him, I am he. And Ben Kalba Savua fell on his face and kissed his feet and gave him half of his money. So the story has a happy ending. Meanwhile, for 24 years, this poor woman lived in poverty because her father swore he wasn't going to give her any money. Unbelievable. Well, now that story might be an exaggeration, but is it possible that this woman got disenfranchised, got disowned by her parents because she married underneath her? It happens all the time. I'm not going to tell you people I know that it's happened to, but I know it's happened. And it happens sometimes out of people assuming that somebody's not going to be good for their child. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're wrong. Yeah. 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 Well, that would make him 85. Yeah, I thought they would say he's about 80, 85. I don't think we don't know for a fact that he was that old when he was killed. Remember, he was murdered. I don't say he died. He was murdered. The Romans murdered him. So Mike's pointing out that there's a legend, an idea that he's 85, which means he spent the first 40 years of his life. No matter what, he spent either the first 40 years of his life, first half of his life, 2/3 of his life, literally not engaged in any kind of learning. Basically illiterate is what they said. That's what they said. So, okay, maybe it's an exaggeration, but it's also possible that, again, this guy came, let's take the kernel of the truth out of that, which is that he came from a very humble background. And then when Rachel married him, her dad was like, I don't want that man for you, and did that. It happens. That part isn't unbelievable. So, yeah. And then it says right here that Rabbi Akiva's daughter did the same thing for Ben Azai, who was a simple person, and she caused him to learn Torah in a similar way by betrothing herself to him and sending him off to study. This explains the folks saying that people say the you follows the you. The daughter's actions are the same as her mother's. That's an interesting idea, right? There's this, back to the other page that we were reading before, there's also a tradition. I'll just show you if I could show you real quick. That because it was in a vote to Rabbi Natan. Come on, dude. There. It's because I was in you have a moat. The legend has it that I'm gonna go back to the line, this other line, that these are why they say he was called Kalba Savua, because anyone who went into his house as hungry as a dog would come out of his house satiated. One second here. Where's the line though? I think I went past it. Where is this? Here it is. It's up here. Yeah, here it is. His wife would go out in a fancy gown with golden jewelry and an engraving of Jerusalem on it. His students said, Rabbi, you are embarrassing us with what you've done for her. And he said to them, she suffered greatly with me for the sake of Torah. So the understanding is he went out and he took the money that his father-in-law gave him, and he made her a beautiful crown with an engraving of Jerusalem on it. Now, Jerusalem had already been destroyed, by the way, by that point. So, yeah. So, Rachel's Jerusalem crown is also part of the tradition. Yeah. So in some places she's named. In the part that you just read, she's not. They don't use her name, but those are some of the traditions about his beginnings and his marriage. Now, I thought we'd really look. We actually already read. We're not going to read it again. His horrible martyrdom, how he's killed, and unfortunately, there's not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot we can learn from that martyrdom, other than won't talk about it now, but we heard about some martyrdoms in the last week in our own day. So it's not like martyrdom is 100% over, but not like when it was in Rabbi Akiva's time, thankfully. But yeah, and what? Yep, you looked it up. No, it's what we were going to talk about right now. So so no, it's no, it's fine. It's no, but Wikipedia for the most part, when it comes to the Judaica, that isn't like on Israel stuff and on politics stuff, people, and other stuff. I'm not just saying it's just that, but a lot of that stuff gets really, really messed up. But and it's just a question of like who was on the page last because people go back and forth and change the stuff. But on the Judaica stuff, like the Torah portion stuff and some of the like the basic Judaica, it's usually pretty good. I mean, yeah, I mean you got to worry that somebody's come and essentially vandalized the page by putting up stuff. But for the most part, like if people aren't going to bother doing that, it's actually the stuff is really quite good. Yeah, especially on the Torah portions. I'm very impressed with the Torah portion. With the Torah portion commentaries. So yeah, as I said, I mean, there's definitely some texts in here that when we talk about martyrdom that um, unfortunately I thought were ancient Jewish history, like maybe from the Holocaust period, but clearly it's not. Clearly, we're not quite done with Jews being martyrs, but I do think it's got less, thankfully, it's got less relevance necessarily for us in the world that we live in. But I'm going to show you a couple things today. And again, we're skipping around a lot. We're skipping around a lot of sections. We're skipping, different ideas. But for the most part, you're getting a chance to learn a little bit about Rabbi Akiva. So let me get to let me get to a section here that gets to let me get to uh, this section. Yeah, the problem is sometimes I think the page was from one section and it's from it, there's no logic to it because it's not like it's not like when we're in brachot, which is generally about the blessings. Some of these sections are very different. Hold it, 1 second. I did. It was unfortunately it was on my other computer and it didn't make it over to. I do. Rabbi Akiva's Rabbi Akiva's was a little bit harder because it was also I had it on a sheet that I did when I was in Israel. So one of the other things we did about Rabbi Akiva, which we're not going to read today because we did it not too long ago, was that he the story of him entering paradise with the other people. We might come back and read a part of that anyways as we read about one of the other rabbis that's mentioned in the section. But hold on 1 second. But you can see that again, even though his father-in-law, disowned him, they were able to make peace. And the father-in-law, is as much as he never should have disowned him, what's interesting about it is that the father-in-law essentially says it wasn't because he was poor, but because he wasn't learned. He didn't have the learning that, I wanted for for my daughter and for her family to have. So and that's why, that's to some extent why Rabbi Akiva, forgives him, is because he asks him flat out, was the problem you had with me based on, the fact that I wasn't rich, or, and or, essentially wasn't my background. All right. So, 1 second. I just want to show the text on how he chose what's going to be in the Bible. Because he is one of those rabbis that helps pick out what's in the Bible. Yes. I'm going to show it to you. It's going to who anointed him? Who said you should be the one that, one of them? Who decided that? The rabbis decided what was going to be in the what was going to be in the Bible. It was not a process that was done by one person, and it was not done by at one time. So let's take a look at the story right now, or one of the versions. This is what it says. There's a discussion here, and this is actually in the Mishnah section. It says, when you study Torah, you are supposed to wash your hands before and after you study Torah, especially if you're studying it out of a scroll. So there's a discussion about the rabbis don't say this book is biblical and this book isn't. What they say is this book defiles the hands, or it doesn't defile the hands. And by saying it defiles the hands, it doesn't mean it's dirty. It means that you have to wash your hands because it's a biblical book. They never said, hey, this is the Tanakh, this is the Bible. They said these are books that are considered holy. And so that when you study them, however you study them, whether you study them in a scroll where there's a few of them, whether you study it in a scroll by itself, this is considered a biblical book. This is considered a book that you have to wash your hands before and after you're reading it. So it's essentially sacred text. And so the rabbis say all the holy scriptures defile the hands, which again is all the Tanakh, not just the Torah, but all the Tanakh. The Song of Songs and Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes, which we're going to read on Tuesday soon, defile the hands. Rabbi Judah says the Song of Song defiles the hands, but there's a dispute about Kohelet. So he says Song of Songs is a biblical book, but not Ecclesiastes. Rabbi Yossi says Kohelet does not defile the hands, but there's a dispute about the Song of Songs. So the other rabbi says, no, Kohelet doesn't defile the hands, but maybe Song of Songs defile, maybe, but maybe it doesn't. Rabbi Shimon says the ruling about Kohelet is one of the leniencies of Bet Shammai and one of the stringencies of Bet Hillel. So it's an example where Bet Shammai is actually lenient and Rabbi Hillel is stringent, which is the opposite of the way normal things are. So you get what's happening here. The rabbis are all saying there's confusion over this. There's different traditions over it. One rabbi says one book is holy, and one rabbi says another book is holy. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I have received a tradition from the 72 elders on the day when they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the head of the academy, that the Song of Songs and Kohelet defile the hands. So he says it's an old tradition, goes back to the 72 elders, goes back many generations, that Song of Songs and Kohelet are holy books. At which point says, the text says, Rabbi Akiva said, far be it. No man in Israel disputed the Song of Songs, saying that it does not defile the hands. No one's ever said Song of Songs. It's ridiculous. Song of Songs is holy. And this is what he said. For the whole world is not as worthy as the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. If they had a dispute only about Kohelet. Rabbi Yochanan ben Yehoshua, the son of the father-in-law of Rabbi Akiva, said in accordance with the words of Ben Azai. So they disputed, and they reached a decision. So here you can see they're arguing about these later books of the Bible, ones that may or may not have been universally accepted as holy writings. And these books are problematic. Ecclesiastes, as we're about to read, is a very, very dark book. It's a book which questions why we're even here. It seems to go against some core basic Jewish ideas, which is why some people think Ecclesiastes, that Kohelet, was written by Greeks or Greek-influenced people who weren't as connected to Jewish tradition. We don't know that, but it very much seems to be like Greek Stoicism or Greek Epicureanism, and it seems to almost not even be Jewish, which is why they have an issue with it. Song of Songs is love poetry. We're going to read that soon too. We're going to read that very soon. Traditionally, we read Song of Songs. It's very short. It's 4 chapters. We have a tradition of reading it during the springtime, during Passover, when it's considered to be a book that, is about love and springtime. But it's a very erotic set of poems. I mean, it's very sexual. Because people would have said, how could that be in the Bible? And Rabbi Akiva steps forward and says, not only is it in the Bible, but it's really, really holy. Now, how did he interpret it? Obviously, he feels that it's interpreted in such a way that it's not just sexual, that there's a metaphor there for Israel and God, that it's not supposed to be just read as a book of poetry from a man to a woman and a woman to a man, because the voices go back and forth between men and women in that. He says it's the Holy of Holies. If everything is holy, Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. Now, this is a really bold statement, and it's one that kind of goes along with maybe some of the other ideas we have about Rabbi Akiva, which is that this is a thought-provoking guy. This is a guy who who thinks outside the box, and who takes interpretations that really push the envelope. Look, how many rabbis supported Bar Kokhba? We don't know. Did the majority of them? Did a quarter of them? Did only a fraction of them support Bar Kokhba? We don't know. But he was one of them, and he was probably the most famous rabbi that supported the Bar Kokhba revolt. So Rabbi Akiva definitely is somebody who is pushing the envelope. And I think this story of how he helped canonize the Bible is an illustration that he would basically say, look at what Rabbi Akiva, does. He's telling people that even the parts of the Bible that you think are maybe provocative or too provocative or R-rated, it's definitely PG-13 Song of Songs and maybe R, that belongs in the Bible. And why did he say that, right? He didn't just say it because he liked the poetry and said, hey, this is beautiful poetry. He did it because he felt that because it's traditionally written by King David and traditionally it had been handed down as a book that our ancestors read, and we don't know how early people started interpreting this as a metaphor, but at least by his point of time, he was not willing to let it go. And again, basically says, if you don't get this, you don't understand Jewish tradition. So no, he's not. He's not one of the 72 elders. He's basically saying that this was done. Elazar ben Azariah lives. I'll tell you when he lives. He's the guy who ends up taking over as a kid, and he's young when he takes over, but he ends up becoming old. There's his grave, also in the Galilee. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lives. One of the ones we saw, yeah. He was. Let's see, what years did he live? Well, mostly these people live in the Galilee. So let's see if I can. Yeah. Yes. When it came to what be in and out of the Bible. I'm gonna Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, but he's definitely pushing the envelope. I'm going to show you. Let me just show you quickly the lineages of who comes before who, because this definitely helps. I don't know if this one is the one that I wanted to show you. Nope. This is too. This is a timeline that's just too big. Um, um, Let me just see if I can get this one up. This one I've seen before. Um, can't see it big right now. Hold it. Let's see if I can look it on this page. Okay. Um, it's not. Here we go. So here is this is in Spanish, but the names are all in Hebrew. Don't worry. Here's Rabbi Hillel, as Mike was saying, early guy. We'll go back to Rabbi Hillel, and there's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's the one who leaves Jerusalem and goes to Yavne. We were just talking about him, John, on the bus. He's the one who evacuates Jerusalem and gets people to Yavne, to the coast. Eventually, they go up north. Here's Rabbi Eliezer. Um, here's here's yeah, yeah. So here's Rabbi Eliezer. That's the one who he, yeah. Well, that's what I'm yeah. That's what I'm giving you. So here's Rabbi Elazar ben Azaris. He's about 50, 60 years before Rabbi Akiva. He's back here. Here's Rabbi Akiva's students, like Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosef. Yeah, it's interesting to see it in Hebrew in Spanish, but you can get the idea. So these are the contemporaries of Rabbi Akiva. These are his teachers, and there's some people who are not on this list, but that's okay. So here's Rabbi Akiva. You can see, one of the important standouts is Rabbi Yochanan, who, as we said, was the one who escaped Jerusalem. And so there's Rabbi Akiva. So again, uh, when we talk about the list here of when he is, um, yeah. So he's the one who really helps get the. And again, so just to think about that chart just for 1 second too. This is when the temple is destroyed. This is when the Bar Kokhba revolt happens. Yep, the revolt of Bar Kokhba, and this is when the Mishnah gets finished. So this is when the rabbis actually start creating the finish the Mishnah and then start the Talmud, the Gemara, and the commentary. And you can see this is in Sephori in the Galilee. No, he's martyred. He's martyred here, and then about 2 generations later, you have Judah. Oh, sorry, I'm not. I stopped sharing it again. Sorry. Yes, thank you, Mary. I went back to that page and didn't show it. Yep. So yes, so this is the temple being destroyed. This is Akiva, and then this is about. So it's almost halfway. So you have Yochanan when the temple is destroyed. You have Akiva, the Bar Kokhba revolt. So it's like 70. Then 60 years later is the Bar Kokhba revolt, and then 60 years later after that is Judah Hanasi and the composition of the Mishnah being finished around here, and you can understand why, because the rabbis are saying, well, look, either this book gets in or this book gets out, and remember, the Christians are doing the same thing at this time. So it's partly because the Romans are killing them, and it's also because the Christians are doing a similar process of canonization, and they better figure it out, because you got people running around saying this book goes into a Bible, and they're like, well, that can't be in the Bible. That happened too late. So that's why that's what's at stake here. What? Yeah, Yeah, because they trust us to some extent. Yeah, I mean, the Christians trusted us to say, and look, it wasn't like the rabbis started the process of canonization. They finished the process of canonization. It wasn't, like we're not going to say, hey, they had a whole bunch of books that they said, well, remember, the Torah is already in a scroll. The prophets are already in a scroll. What they're really talking about is what's going in Ketuvim, what's going to go in that last miscellaneous section. I mean, look, I don't want to say they didn't have some discussion about what prophets are going to be in there, but for the most part, the prophets are pretty well done. And so the rabbis are kind of deciding, okay, what are these other books? What are we going to do with Song of Songs? What are we going to do with Ecclesiastes? What are we going to do with Ben Sira? Well, obviously Ben Sira didn't make the cut, but Ben Sira did make the cut for the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls community had Ben Sira. The Catholic Church has Ben Sira as part of the Apocrypha. The Talmud quotes Ben Sira as an important book. It's not in the Bible. Well, but the Catholic Church starts 300 years after the scrolls. It's not like it's that far off. The Catholics had decided, at a certain point to canonize these books, like the Book of the Maccabees. Jews decided, no, that's not going in a Bible. It's too new, and quite frankly, they didn't like the Maccabees, so why would they keep it? We'll get to that. We're going to show that. Look, there's never a discussion in the Bible, in the Talmud, about Maccabees ever getting in the Bible. It's not even a discussion for them. It's not open to discussion. There's no concern that it would ever be there. How Christians had that discussion, the Catholic Church had it in there, and at a certain point, the Protestants said it's not in the Bible. It was already in the Bible, and the Protestants said it's not in the Bible, because they said we're following what's in the Jewish Bible, and that's not in the Jewish Bible. So Martin Luther basically said, we're going to follow what's in the Hebrew Bible. They didn't look at what the Catholic Church said. They said, if it's not in the Hebrew Bible, it's not going in. Yeah. They essentially went back to the sure. And when you do it, you're making a political statement of, we don't listen to you. So when the Protestants did it, they didn't add something, by the way. It's not like they added anything, just cut it out. They said, that's not going in our Bible. So it's not in. Now, that doesn't mean Protestants don't study the Book of Maccabees. They do, but it's not part of their Bible. So the Catholic Church kept it, and they still kept it. And so if you want to look at a Bible with the Book of Maccabees, the only Bible you'll see that in is the Catholic Bible. So we're going to talk about, I don't know, they make stuff. I'm not going to say that. I don't make stuff up. But today we're going to finish with the last part of Rabbi Akiva's life, which is not his death. Not his death. It's a scene that is got his death in it, but it's not about his death. And I wanted you to read his death before. You've read it. Now, it's not the first time we discussed it. And we talked about the fact, even when we were in Israel a couple years ago, that he died in Caesarea. He didn't die. He was murdered in Caesarea. That's where he was jailed and then tortured by the Romans. No, it's present day, middle of Israel. Yeah, so you can go to Caesarea. You can see the city that King Herod built. It was built for the Romans so they could enjoy Israel. And I was just going to say, they turned Caesarea into Caesar. I was just going to make a joke. Caesarea was what King Herod built for the Romans so that they could have a Riviera on the Mediterranean. And that's not a joke, actually. That's the truth. He called it Caesarea. He named it after the Caesar. It's going to be like Beit Melania. That's going to be where Beit Lachia is now going to be called Beit Melania. We actually just saw Beit Lachia. That who didn't? That Israel didn't? Well, it's interesting because Caesarea is still Caesarea. They didn't change the name. You're right. They didn't change it back. But they knew that there's a historical history there. And there is something interesting about reclaiming something from the Romans and using their name for it and not being afraid of it. Because to some extent, the Jewish community that's there, and there is a kibbutz right there. There's a kibbutz right next door to the ruins of Caesarea, right? And there actually are beautiful homes in Caesarea. It's a golf course. It's one of the few golf courses in Israel. And we've talked about this before. There's actually Netanyahu's home. His home, not in Jerusalem, is in Caesarea. and it's on the golf course, and it's one of the most um, it's one of the most desirable homes or desirable areas in Israel, and he's does pretty well. But what's interesting about the home is that I'll show it to you since I have a computer and you have a computer and you're watching at home. These are the homes in Caesarea. You can see the water back there, right? And it's not like it's Israel. It's not Beverly Hills or I would say Palisades, but this is nicer than Palisades now, right, folks? This is not a it's a little rugged. It's a little bit more rugged than the landscape gardens of Beverly Hills, but this is his home, right? This is his home in Caesarea. His home in Caesarea got hit by a drone, my friends. Yeah, the Iranians targeted his home. It was I want to say 2 months ago. Mm-mm. It was well, the Australian's not going to tell me. They're going to make me pay. So no, no, no. So yeah, he was pretty ticked off. So you can also see they've been protesting on his at his home. Um, let's see what date it was. October 22nd. No, that's not true. Was it that long ago? I didn't think it was only that long ago. Okay, so it was October 22nd, it says. So it wasn't tremendous damage, and I don't think they wanted it. They didn't want this they didn't want this to be seen anywhere, but yeah, I mean it was more of a symbolic strike. But yeah, it freaked people out. It freaked Netanyahu didn't like it. But no, the neighbors didn't like it. But yeah, that's Caesarea. So your point of why did they not rename it? It's interesting. And we've talked about this before, and we've seen it. The kibbutz next door to Caesarea. So you have these beautiful homes on the golf course, and right by the right by the beautiful ruins of this Roman city is the kibbutz. And the kibbutz that you have heard of is called Even Khazar, which is also known as Caesar Stone. Mm-hmm. That's where it comes from. There's two places where they manufacture. One is in Carmiel in the north, and one is Kibbutz Sdot Yam. So they love using it, right? Israelis in particular. So that's Kibbutz Sdot Yam. This is the kibbutz right here. It is right there, and it's just south of Caesarea. And Hannah Senesh, the hero of the Hungarian underground who was living in Israel and went back to try to rescue her family and other Jews from Hungary, she was a kibbutznik at Caesarea. And she wrote the famous poem, The Road to Caesarea, right? Which you don't know is it the Road of Caesarea, but that's what they call it in Israel. I just spelled it wrong. The walk to Caesarea, or the Derech Caesarea, Helicha le Caesarea. You know it by this. Eli, Eli. Shalo Yigamer. She wrote that song as she was walking from the kibbutz to the water. Eli, Eli, Shalo Yigamer. So that's the poem that was turned into music. So that was written about Caesarea too, and it's actually called the way to Caesarea. So Hannah Senesh wrote it, and then composer David Zahavi put it to music. So yeah, Caesarea is very much in the consciousness of Israel, and they don't make it. We don't make an issue of it. We've adapted it and said, hey, the Roman history is part of the history of the country. So let's take a look at Rabbi Akiva, and we're going to finish with this little story about Rabbi Akiva and the lessons that we can learn from him. So this is a guy who starts off from very humble beginnings and has very little literacy, if you'd say, in Jewish literacy for sure. And we know he's martyred. He's murdered. And then we have this story in the Talmud. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, when Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One, blessed be he. And this is, by the way, when does Moses go on high? When he's getting the Ten Commandments. So he's getting the Ten Commandments from God. He's getting the Torah essentially from God. And Moses is watching God put the final touches on the Torah. Right? He's up in there watching it. And he sees God sitting and tying crowns on the letters of the Torah. And Moses said before God, Master of the universe, who is preventing you from giving the Torah without these additions? Why are you doing this? God, just give me the Torah. I got to go back. Of course he did. He didn't realize how the people were building a golden calf while he's doing this. Why? Just give it to me. God said to him, there is a man who is destined to be born after several generations, and Akiva ben Yosef is his name. He is destined to derive from each and every thorn of these crowns mounds upon mounds of halachot. It is for his sake that the crowns must be added to the letters of Torah. You can't leave here yet because Rabbi Akiva is going to live in the future and he's going to know this stuff. He's going to understand it. He's going to be able to figure this stuff out. He's going to derive lessons. People will get stuff from this. Moses said before God, Master of the universe, show him to me. And God said to him, return behind you. So God said, turn around. And Rabbi Akiva turns around and he's projected into the future. Moses, yeah, just turn around. Moses went and sat at the end of the 8th row in Rabbi Akiva's study hall and did not understand what they were saying. Moses' strength waned as he thought his Torah knowledge was deficient. When Rabbi Akiva arrived at the discussion of one matter, his students said to him, my teacher, from where do you derive this? And Rabbi Akiva said to them, it is a halakha transmitted to Moses from Sinai. When Moses heard this, his mind was put at ease, as this too was part of the Torah that he was to receive. Wow. So Moses hears the discussions going on in the yeshiva, and he doesn't understand them. He's like, how am I a part of this? These people are saying things I don't understand. And he doesn't get it. It's like advanced mathematics. He's sitting there going, I have no idea what these people are talking about. And Akiva says, but this all comes from Moses. And so when he says that, Moses hears that, he's hearing this. He's given credit for it, and he feels better. He says, to some extent, even though I don't understand what they're saying, they're giving me credit for it. And it makes him feel better because he was going to lose it. He was like, how am I a part of this? Right? It's not over. Yeah. Well, look, the rabbis wrote this story during Rabbi Akiva's time, right? They're projecting. What's the lesson from this, folks? What's the lesson from this? Yeah. No, okay, so what do you think it is? Oh, so what do you think it is? What do you think it is? Mhm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Guys, YouTube land, you can jump in on this. So yeah. So so the lesson so far is that Moses at this point only feels comforted to some extent because because he's been told he's part of the transmission process. He's given credit for it. He still doesn't understand it, by the way, at this point. He doesn't understand what they're saying, but he's like, oh, you mean I helped make this happen? It's during the time of Rabbi Akiva. It's after Rabbi Akiva lived. Yes. And they're saying that Moses' mind would be blown. They're saying Moses wouldn't understand the discussions that they're having right now, which is probably true. Look, it's as if we said, if I wouldn't say Einstein because we're not that far away from Einstein, and it seems like Washington having well, he might be upset by what's happening in Congress, but let's use another one. Let's say Isaac Newton goes into a class at MIT and they're discussing gravity and they're discussing how gravity is whether it's a part of whether it's a part. So he'd listen to this stuff and he goes, what are they talking about? I have no idea what they're talking about. And then somebody says, if it wasn't for Newton, we wouldn't have understood this concept of whatever. And then he feels better because somebody just recognized him and said, oh, he says, you know what? I'm part of this. I don't understand it, but I know that I'm part of this. I know that they couldn't have gotten to this step without me. So even though he's not really a part of the discussion, he can't even begin to get into the discussion. He knows he's helped them get to that point. So it's almost as if you think about what your legacy is, right? And even if your legacy is, you don't understand your legacy, even if you don't understand your legacy, it's important. And you played a role in getting the people to the point where they're at now. It's about maybe Moses is part of it, but we're not done yet. So keep in mind that this is only part of the story because I don't really think that's the bigger lesson is one that I don't know, maybe it's not a bigger lesson, but there's a reason why I shared it with you today. So let's get to this. But because we're not done. So Moses returned back to his time, and he's standing with God and Mount Sinai. He returned and came before the Holy One, blessed be he. And he said to God, Master of the universe, you have a man as great as this, and yet you chose to give the Torah through me? Yeah. Yeah. And so you see Moses' humility here too, right? You see Moses' humility, and he feels like he's out of place here compared to Rabbi Akiva. Why? Why, God? Why? And God said to him, shh, shush, shush. That's what it says. God said, shush. That's what it says, literally. He said right here, it says shtuk. Shtuk. Have you ever heard that word in Yiddish? Shtuk. It means stop. Stop talking. Shtuk. Be quiet. Shtuk. No, shtuk. Shtuk means stop talking. Be silent. God said to him, be silent. This intention arose before me. I know why. I know why. Moses said before God, Master of the universe, Rabbono Shel Olam, you have shown me Rabbi Akiva's Torah. Now show me his reward. And God said to him, return to where you were. And Moses turns back to the time machine. And he saw them weighing Rabbi Akiva's flesh in a butcher shop after his skin was taken off of him. I mean, nothing more horrific than this. His body has been torn apart. Moses says to God, Master of the universe, this is his Torah, and this is its reward? And God said to him, shtuk. This intention rose before me. Same thing. You don't understand. I know what I'm doing. Now look. That's it. There's no other discussion. The next discussion is about the crowns on the Torah that we're talking about, those beautiful little designs. That's the end of the story. That's the way the story ends. The story ends with a discussion about why do horrific things happen to good people? How does this happen? how does this make sense, God? And of course, it's very much on my mind and your mind and other people who saw what we saw this last week. Talk about again tomorrow. How do you make sense of this? How do you make sense of these horrific acts to innocent people and uh, righteous people? Stop teaching Torah. Yeah, stop teaching Torah. We read that. The discussion, we read that a couple weeks ago. The discussion is, I'm only saying it because we read a couple weeks ago. He's told by the Romans, stop teaching Torah. And he says to them, I can't. That's where we live. We live in Torah. It's the remember the parable? He said, it'd be like the fox telling the fish, get out of the water. And he says, well, we live in the water. Even if there's nets here to catch us, this is where we live. This is what we do. We study Torah. Maybe, but he lives in Israel and he's going to be a Jew. He says, this is what I do. So you can't take me. No, you could. He could, but he's teaching Torah. There is no other academy. Well, there's assumedly maybe there's academies in Babylonia at that point. There were, but he's a Jew from Israel who's teaching in Israel. They haven't lost the Bar Kokhba revolt yet. They're going to. They're going to in the next few years. But at this point, there's still Jews like Rabbi Akiva saying, this is our home. This is our home. It's not until the Rabbi Akiva and the rest of these people are martyred and the rest of the rabbis who survive say, no, we'll keep a low profile now. We'll continue to study Torah, but we're not going to fight for our national independence anymore. But yeah, I mean, we saw Jews in the last few weeks who've said, no matter what, I'm not leaving. Why do you live on the border with Gaza? Because this is my home. So there's, yeah, a resonance there, John. There's a reason why. I did not pick talking about Rabbi Akiva because of that, because we studied Rabbi Akiva before we left. I wanted to close the loop on it. I wanted you to see this text. I wanted you to hear the other parts of Rabbi Akiva. The fact that people thought he was an ignoramus and he went back and studied and he wasn't going to be deterred and he didn't care about anything other than living up to his potential, and his wife supported him, all the other things about him. But now you've also read that when he died, it leaves us with questions. And when we hear about somebody who's righteous, who didn't seem to get the right payback, this isn't a new question. This isn't something that just happened to modern human beings. This is a question the rabbis asked thousands of years ago. And the answer is essentially, God knows why it happens. God. We don't understand it. The rabbis don't give us what? Yeah. Well, the reach is only in the sense that when people say to Rabbi Akiva, why do you stop teaching Torah? And these people say, why do you live there? Because some people on our trip said to me, why do these people live there? I would say, well, where would you like them to live? Fine, but you don't say you don't live there, because there's no place in Israel that's not 20 miles, less than 20 miles from a border of somebody. So no place in Israel you can live in. And Kiva knew what was happening and said, I'd rather live and die as a Jew doing what I do than not be true to myself. And so he did it. Okay, so some rabbis said that, but if you don't have people willing to lay down their lives for the principle, then you're clearly saying the principle really isn't that important. Look, I don't want every Jew to die to make a point. On the other hand, by the way, that's what Gandhi said Jews should do in the Holocaust. He actually was famous for saying that Jews should martyr themselves in the Holocaust. That would be fine. Yeah, he didn't say it out of anger. He said that they would be martyrs, and he was willing to be martyred. So he said Jews should be willing to be martyred too. I mean, we don't want that to happen, and the rabbis balance that out. But at the same time, you have to have people like Rabbi Akiva, and you have to have people like the people that are living there now. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. Look, you're essentially telling people we're not going to fold it up, because Yeah. The hill he wanted to die on was to make sure that people learned Torah. And could he have done it in a more secretive way? Maybe. Maybe he got informed on. Maybe he was too famous. I mean, whatever it was, there were clearly other rabbis who got away with it. The other problem with Rabbi Akiva is that maybe he pushed it too far by supporting Bar Kokhba. Maybe it was his political leanings that also got him into trouble. But the rest of the rabbis recognized him as a great scholar, so they couldn't throw him under the bus and say, yeah, he died because of his politics. One could make the argument there would be no Christianity if Jesus hadn't been executed. Yeah. Yeah. She was a Russian Jew. Yeah, combating anti-Semitism, yeah, yes. Yeah, Finland. Yeah, she wasn't allowed to speak in Finland for those who can't hear. Well, I will say this. I will say that I will say that however we understand his role to play in Jewish history, he definitely played a role in that he seemed to have, I don't know if he could have done as much if he hadn't been martyred, but again, he shouldn't have had to be martyred. So um look, we mentioned him. So Hannah Senesh could have lived the rest of her life out. She would have probably died maybe 15, 20 years ago. She could have lived into her 90s and been alive 5 years ago. She went back in and parachuted into to Hungary from Israel, was living safely in Israel. She had escaped. She did not have to go back. There are people who make that decision. She knew what she was doing. She knew she was risking her life. She knew she was dead if she got captured. So there are people who do these things, and they become legend. I'm not saying that people should go out and martyr themselves. On the other hand, if you don't have people who are really willing to risk their lives, look, you can't blame her. She was murdered by Nazis. So you blame the Nazis, you blame Hamas, you blame the people who are perpetrating the Romans, you blame the people who perpetrated it. Could they do we want everyone to martyr themselves? No. The rabbis are very clear. You should not put yourself in a situation where you have to be martyred. But in a situation where maybe, again, Rabbi Akiva was in too high of a profile position to do anything other than that, in that case, what he did was something that we talk about 2,000 years later. And again, nobody should do that. Nobody should ever be in a situation like that, because Jews shouldn't be in a situation where people are trying to kill them. Guess what? We're not there yet. As of today, we're not there yet. And believe me, John, I think about it myself, because I have been told many times that there's things that I'm doing that are too high profile. I have not stopped doing it. You don't know how many people said that doing the thing that I did for Paul Kessler, I was risking myself, my safety in doing that. It was one of the reasons why I had mixed feelings about inviting other people to come out and doing it. And again, unless they were somebody, like you, who happens to have a carry and conceal permit and knows how to operate a weapon and knows how to defend themselves. I mean, there are people who I probably would have said, hey, if they said, hey, I want to come out, there were people who I said, maybe, just be aware that maybe it's not a good place to come. But Yeah, I mean, I know it, but if I'm not willing to do that, then nobody is willing to do it, and then this stuff goes on without anybody holding the people accountable. So I don't have a choice, but yeah, I think about it. I'm not doing it to be martyred. I want to live a good life. I want to live a long life, but I don't sit in trees. And that was not risking my life. I want to make it clear that was making a statement, and one that had other repercussions. And I've told people this before. It wasn't just about saving a tree. It was about what's happening in a greater level to, environmental issues, and bigger issue, which was cutting down that tree would have also turned that road into a 55-mile-per-hour road, they moved it, and a tree survived, but it was right in front of a school, and I did not think elementary school should be on a 50-mile-per-hour road, which it still is, but fortunately they haven't built out that area, so it hasn't become the highway that it could. But it's still an accident waiting to happen. There are crossing guards there, but it's not a. I mean, I see it almost every day. It's not a good place for a school on a 50 mile per, even though they take it down to 25. I really do think schools should be in areas where it's a slower traffic area, where it's not on a highway, that it's Pico Canyon is a major artery. It's a major artery. In my opinion, a school should never be on a road that's a 4-lane road. It should be on a one, never should be in an area that's not normally 25 to 35. Which one? Yeah, Monroe. High schools are. That's our high schools. Which was? Which, oh, Sepulveda. Yeah, it's true. Sepulveda is a pretty major street. But I can't think of many elementaries that are on major high. I can't. I mean, Stevenson Ranch Elementary I mean, Pico Canyon Elementary is on Pico Canyon. Did not have to be. Anyways, and if the tree had been there, it would have the tree being there would have made that road 35 mile per hour because of the turn that it was there before they moved the tree. So I was kind of hoping that the tree would be able to yeah, the tree still lives. But yeah, that was not anywhere near as dangerous. So I will not risk my life as much for I know, but as much for as I would for a tree. I would not risk my life for a tree. That's for a person, yes, but not for a tree. Could have. You're right, but I had harnesses on. It was not. Yeah, it was not. It was not a. Yeah, it was not. It was not unsafe. I was with people who knew what they were doing. Well, folks, we do not have a group next week or the week after. We'll be off the next couple of weeks, but we will be coming back and we'll give people a schedule. And hopefully I'll actually have the next few rabbis laid out of the people that we're going to learn from. But this story right here is one that, gosh, it really, I did not intend to, I did not intend to have the feelings about this story that I did, because I knew we'd be talking about martyrs in the last few weeks, but and modern martyrs, but I did not, when we started talking about Rabbi Akiva, giving people this, giving this lesson and thinking about, again, what we'll talk about tomorrow. Oh, we're gonna look at Hillel's, but again, of all the rabbis that we learn about, Rabbi Akiva is one of the most amazing ones, and this lesson alone is one that is one of the things that we talk about. We talk about all the time. I mean, we talk about this issue all the time. Why do good people suffer? Why is there? Yeah. Yep. Thanks, and thank you, David and Cheryl. Yes, we got back safe, and we got everybody back safe. So until everybody's back safe, the trip is not over until we get there. And fortunately, everybody was back on this flight with us. So we got everybody back safe, and that's the most important. Now we got to get Joyce healthy too. So got to get her back to safety. Yeah, she's still not feeling great. So thank you everybody for being here, and we will see you in the coming weeks. Be well, and we'll be here tomorrow night to go over the trip, and then Friday night with services with Wendy. Take care, everybody.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.